The Browning M2, 50 caliber machine gun, earned its enduring moniker, Ma Deuce, for compelling reasons. When John Moses Browning brought his design to fruition in 1921, he bequeathed to the world what military historians universally acknowledge as the most singularly successful heavy machine gun ever conceived. This formidable weapon possessed the inherent capability to perforate engine blocks with devastating force from a distance of 500 yards, to shred light armor with contemptuous ease, and to propel a half-inch diameter projectile screaming downrange at an astonishing velocity of 2,110 feet per second. By the year 1942, every American infantry company deployed across the vast expanse of the Pacific Theater coveted as many of these monstrous implements of war as they could possibly acquire. The psychological reverberations alone, which it generated on the battlefield, were considered to be worth their weight in precious gold. Japanese soldiers, recognizing its distinctive rapid-fire cadence, aptly christened it the Woodpecker of Death. However, there existed a critical detail that the vibrant recruiting posters of the era conspicuously omitted. The M2 harbored a profound, indeed fatal, design vulnerability that every seasoned machine gunner inevitably came to dread. While the weapon was theoretically capable of unleashing a blistering fusillade of 450 to 600 rounds per minute, in practical combat scenarios, a gunner could anticipate perhaps only 90 to 120 seconds of continuous, sustained fire before the unyielding laws of physics inexorably transformed their most trusted companion into a mere inert, useless mass of metal. The root of this critical issue was not a scarcity of ammunition. A well-provisioned crew could, in theory, continue to feed that ravenous beast for hours on end. The fundamental impediment was heat, an insidious problem that possessed the very real potential to exact a deadly toll on the operating crew. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Each instance, the M2's firing pin struck a primer. It initiated the combustion of 240 grains of smokeless powder, a process that generated an approximate 18,000 foot-pounds of raw energy. A significant majority of this immense energy served to propel the bullet forward with incredible force, yet approximately 30% of it was directly converted into intense thermal energy. With every single round discharged, the barrel itself absorbed a staggering sum of roughly 5,400 foot-pounds of heat. To fire a mere 100 rounds in rapid succession meant an overwhelming influx of 540,000 foot-pounds of thermal energy being relentlessly pumped into a relatively slender steel tube weighing a mere 26 pounds. The mathematical equation was both straightforward and brutally unforgiving in its implications. Following a mere 2 minutes of sustained, continuous fire, the barrel's internal temperature would inexorably climb past a scorching 800 degree F. Should one push its operational limits to 3 minutes, the temperature would flirt precariously with 1,100 degree F. At the critical threshold of 200 degree Fahrenheit, the very structural integrity of the barrel's steel began to compromise and degrade. The Army Ordnance Department, of course, was acutely aware of this inherent limitation. The comprehensive technical manual, meticulously issued to every M2 crew, contained explicit, unambiguous warnings, prominently printed in bold, stark letters, stating, "Sustained fire exceeding 2 minutes will result in barrel failure." The potential repercussions of disregarding this crucial warning spanned a spectrum from merely detrimental to utterly catastrophic. In the most favorable scenario, the barrel would only warp slightly, causing a severe degradation in the weapon's accuracy. Bullets would then begin to keyhole, tumbling erratically sideways through the air, rather than maintaining a true, stable flight path. In the worst-case scenario, the barrel itself could catastrophically rupture, expelling dangerous shrapnel back towards the gunner's face and rendering the weapon permanently inoperable. Occupying the mid-range on this scale of disaster, the headspace, that vital and precise gap between the bolt face and the barrel, would expand significantly due to thermal deformation, leading to rounds detonating prematurely within the chamber. Experienced gunsmiths referred to this perilous phenomenon as a cook-off, a condition that could transform a precisely controlled weapon into an uncontrollably dangerous one with alarming swiftness. Standard military doctrine was developed to confront this operational limitation directly and decisively. Every M2 machine gun position was mandated to have a readily available spare barrel, and its crew meticulously trained in the intricate, yet swift, barrel change procedure. The established protocol was to swap the barrel approximately every 90 seconds. By allowing the superheated barrel to cool for a period of 20 minutes, a crew could, in theory, sustain continuous suppressive fire indefinitely. The barrel change operation itself typically consumed about 30 to 45 seconds for a highly proficient crew, perhaps extending to 60 seconds if executed in challenging conditions such as darkness or under direct enemy fire. The Army even provided specialized asbestos gloves specifically designed for safely handling scalding hot barrels, though many crews found them excessively bulky and often resorted to using rags or even their uniform sleeves. However, all of these tactical considerations predicated upon one absolutely critical assumption: that the tactical situation would permit the crew sufficient time to pause their firing. Guadalcanal in November 1942 represented a pivotal moment where the formidable Empire of Japan sought to ascertain whether American forces could indeed be dislodged and driven back into the vast, indifferent sea. This island, an expanse of land approximately 90 miles in length and 25 miles in width, had by then become the undeniable epicenter of the entire Pacific War, ever since the initial Marine landings on August 7th. By November, the brutal conflict had degenerated into a grinding, sanguinary stalemate, primarily concentrated around Henderson Field, the sole operational airstrip within the Solomon Islands archipelago. Whosoever asserted control over that vital airstrip would invariably command the skies, and whosoever commanded the skies would ultimately secure victory in the Pacific. The Marines had successfully established a defensive perimeter around Henderson Field, yet this perimeter was stretched perilously thin almost to the breaking point. The 1st Marine Division had been engaged in continuous combat for 3 grueling months, enduring daily casualties, and vital reinforcements were arriving at a pace significantly slower than the rate at which men were falling. On the night of November 12th, intelligence reports began to filter through, indicating that a major Japanese offensive was imminent. These reports proved to be accurate in their prediction. However, what those initial assessments tragically failed to grasp was the sheer, overwhelming scale of the impending attack. This was not destined to be a mere probing attack or a harassment mission designed to disrupt. Imperial General Headquarters had committed the entirety of the 38th Infantry Division, a force of fresh, highly motivated troops recently arrived from Japan, with explicit orders to breach the American lines and retake Henderson Field at any and all costs. Marine Corporal Anthony Stein, affectionately known to his squad mates as Tony, occupied a crucial defensive position on what topographical maps designated as Hill 132, though it was universally referred to by the troops as Henderson Ridge. This ridge formed a formidable natural barrier on the southern approach to the vital airfield, elevated approximately 50 feet above the surrounding dense jungle terrain. Stein's M2 50 caliber machine gun was strategically positioned to provide comprehensive cover over a draw, a natural corridor nestled between two higher hills where the dense vegetation thinned out just enough to create an unavoidable kill zone, roughly 80 yards deep and 40 yards wide. Military analysts would later commend it as a textbook defensive placement. Stein, with a more visceral understanding of the grim realities, called it a death trap, for if the Japanese forces surged through that draw in significant numbers, his three-man gun crew would represent the sole, fragile impediment, preventing them from completely overrunning and collapsing the entire right flank of the American defenses. The anticipated attack commenced precisely at 0230 hours on November 13th. There was no preceding artillery preparation, no discernible warning, merely ominous shapes materializing and moving stealthily in the profound darkness. There were many of them, advancing with the kind of disciplined precision that is only honed through years of rigorous training among professional soldiers. The 38th Division was comprised not of green, inexperienced troops, but seasoned veterans. These men possessed considerable combat experience, having fought extensively in Manchuria and China. They knew their grim business well. Stein's assistant gunner, Private Eddie Morrison, was the first to discern their presence through the oppressive darkness, estimating an initial force of at least 200 men forming up within the tree line, possibly even more. They were equipped with Bangalore torpedoes, designed to breach defensive wire obstacles, scaling ladders to surmount the defensive trenches, and a substantial quantity of small arms ammunition, sufficient to sustain a prolonged assault for many hours. The situation rapidly escalated, transforming into a desperate struggle for survival as the relentless assault persisted for an extended duration. It was at this critical juncture that the strategic calculations took a dire turn. Conventional military doctrine typically advocated for the judicious application of firepower, emphasizing brief, controlled bursts of 5 to 7 rounds, interspersed with pauses to evaluate the tactical landscape, conserve precious ammunition, mitigate the risk of barrel overheating, and ensure the unwavering reliability of the weapon system. However, the seasoned gunner, Stein, possessed a keen understanding of the unfolding catastrophe before him. This was unequivocally not a scenario where measured, intermittent fire would suffice. The Japanese forces were demonstrably concentrating their strength, preparing for a devastating human wave attack, a relentless surge designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer numerical superiority, regardless of the staggering casualties incurred, until they either breached the defensive perimeter or were utterly annihilated. Should Stein adhere to the prescribed short bursts, a sufficient number of enemy combatants would inevitably survive the lethal kill zone, thereby enabling them to overrun his position. Once they successfully penetrated beyond his heavy machine gun, they would find themselves on the vulnerable reverse slope of the defensive line, with only scattered rifle squads, standing as a meager barrier between them and the strategically vital airfield. Stein was equipped with a mere 2 spare barrels for his formidable weapon. Adhering strictly to established doctrine, this limited supply translated to a maximum of approximately 6 minutes of continuous firing time, distributed across a projected 30-minute engagement, factoring in the necessary intervals for barrel changes and crucial cooling periods. His dedicated loader, Private First Class Jack Chen, had meticulously arranged 12 ammunition cans, each brimming with rounds within immediate arm's reach. This amounted to a substantial reserve of 600 rounds, with additional runners poised to resupply them as needed. Consequently, the availability of ammunition was not the primary concern. Rather, the critical constraint was time itself. Stein, with a growing sense of urgency, was confronting an assault force that would undeniably demand a minimum of 8 to 10 minutes of uninterrupted, sustained, suppressive fire to effectively neutralize. We ask you now to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The skilled engineers at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, responsible for the vast majority of M2 barrel production during the Second World War, meticulously selected a specific steel alloy identified as SAEE 4150. This particular chromium molybdenum steel was chosen with deliberate foresight for its exceptional resilience and inherent capacity to endure repeated cycles of extreme thermal stress while preserving its structural integrity under immense operational pressures. At ambient room temperature, SAE 4150 exhibited an impressive tensile strength of approximately 125,000 pounds per square inch. The intricate manufacturing process commenced with the precise gun drilling of a solid steel billet, followed by the meticulous rifling of the interior with 4 distinct grooves, expertly twisted in a right-hand direction at a rate of 1 turn every 15 inches. The completed barrel then underwent a rigorous heat treatment regimen, involving heating to an exact temperature of 1,550 degrees F, subsequently quenching it in oil, and finally tempering it at 800 degrees. This precise sequence imparted the critical hardness rating of Rockwell C28 to 32, essential for its intended performance. This is precisely where the profound principles of material science transitioned from theoretical concepts to a matter of immediate life and death. The intricate heat treatment process meticulously crafted a unique microstructure within the steel, endowing it with the remarkable ability to withstand thermal stress up to a critical threshold. However, it is a fundamental characteristic of steel that its mechanical properties predictably diminish along a discernible curve as its temperature escalates. At a temperature of 600 degrees F, SAE 4150 steel commendably retained approximately 90% of its initial room temperature strength. As the temperature climbed to 900 degrees, this retention regrettably decreased to 70%. Further ascent to 1,100 degrees resulted in a significant loss of half its original strength. And at a scorching 1,200 degrees F, the temperature routinely attained by M2 barrels after merely 150 to 180 seconds of continuous sustained firing, the steel retained a perilous mere 40% of its original tensile strength. Although the barrel visually remained a solid metallic component, appearing ostensibly normal, it was in fact profoundly compromised structurally in ways that could manifest instantaneously and with devastating, catastrophic consequences. The various modes of failure were diverse, yet experienced gunners had through grim experience, learned to instinctively recognize the telltale warning signs. The initial indication of impending trouble was a noticeable degradation in accuracy. As the barrel rapidly heated and expanded, the microscopic rifling grooves within the bore imperceptibly widened, consequently causing the bullet to lose its crucial stabilizing spin. Rounds that, under normal circumstances, would consistently group within a precise 6-inch circle at a distance of 100 yards, began to scatter erratically, spreading out to an alarming 18 or even 24 inches. Tracers, which were strategically incorporated as every fifth round in standard M2 ammunition belts, started drawing peculiar curving trajectories through the air instead of maintaining their characteristic straight lines. Astute gunners meticulously monitored their tracers with unwavering diligence. The moment these luminous projectiles began to spiral unpredictably, it signaled an urgent warning. There were perhaps only 20 seconds remaining before severe and potentially catastrophic problems would inevitably commence. Following the accuracy degradation, the critical issue of headspace emerged, and this particular problem rapidly escalated into an extremely perilous situation. The headspace on an M2 machine gun referred to the precise gap existing between the bolt face and the base of the cartridge when a round was properly chambered, ideally set at a meticulous 0.063 inches, roughly equivalent to the thickness of 2 sheets of standard paper. As the barrel heated and expanded, this crucial gap inevitably widened. If this expansion became excessive, the cartridge case would no longer be adequately supported when the firing pin struck the primer. The primer would ignite, internal pressure would rapidly build, and the unsupported brass case would violently rupture. In some instances, this merely resulted in inconvenient extraction failures and persistent jams. However, in more dangerous scenarios, it meant superheated gases and sharp brass fragments violently venting back through the receiver, directly into the gunner's face, posing a serious threat of injury. The most dire and dreaded scenario was a phenomenon known as thermal runaway. Under conditions of extreme temperature, the chamber itself could become so intensely hot that it would ignite the propellant powder within a chambered round without the firing pin ever making contact with the primer. This spontaneous ignition, known as a cook-off, would fire the round, immediately cycle and chamber the next one, which would then also cook off, initiating an uncontrollable runaway gun that would continue to fire relentlessly until the entire ammunition belt was expended. Such an event was impossible to stop. The trigger mechanism became utterly irrelevant. The only viable option was to physically break the ammunition belt, a desperate measure that, in the chaotic maelstrom of active combat, might be neither feasible nor safe to attempt. Marine Corps after-action reports, meticulously compiled from the grueling campaign on Guadalcanal, documented a disturbing total of 23 distinct instances of M2 barrel failures during the initial 3 months of intense fighting. A significant 7 of these incidents culminated in complete barrel ruptures, while a further 4 resulted in serious and debilitating injuries to the machine gun crews operating the weapons. In one particularly grim and tragic incident on October 8, 1942, a cook-off tragically claimed the life of a corporal from the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, when the runaway gun, traversing uncontrollably on its mount, inadvertently swept a lethal hail of rounds across his own defensive position. Anthony Peter Stein, at the age of 23 on that fateful day of November 13, 1942, was considered one of the older and more experienced men within his squad. He had spent his formative years in Dayton, Ohio, where his father diligently worked as a skilled tool and die maker at the esteemed National Cash Register Company. Tony, following in his father's footsteps, pursued a career in machining, dedicating 3 intensive years to mastering the intricacies of precision metalwork before the onset of the war. This specialized background proved to be far more significant than anyone could have initially comprehended. Stein possessed an innate, intuitive understanding of machinery that most 23-year-olds simply did not. He intrinsically comprehended how metal behaved under duress. He had personally witnessed steel warp and distort from intense heat, observed critical tolerances shift as components expanded, and had learned, through hands-on experience, how to operate effectively within or around these inherent material limitations. Stein had voluntarily enlisted in the Marine Corps in January 1942, successfully completing the rigorous boot camp training at Parris Island before receiving his assignment to the 1st Marine Division as a highly valued machine gunner. The Corps, recognizing his exceptional mechanical aptitude, specifically placed him on the formidable M2 heavy machine gun. The weapons platoon sergeant, upon reviewing Stein's civilian work history, immediately declared, "You're on the 50." By November, he had accumulated extensive experience, having fired approximately 8,000 rounds through various M2s during both intensive training exercises and actual combat engagements. He possessed an intimate knowledge of the weapon's unique quirks, its formidable strengths, and its inherent limitations, arguably better than he knew his own personal rifle. Now he stood resolutely behind that powerful weapon, keenly observing the multiplying enemy shapes emerging from the encroaching darkness, his mind rapidly processing complex calculations that had nothing whatsoever to do with raw courage, and everything to do with grim life or death arithmetic. The critical situation demanded an immediate and rigorous calculation, a stark confrontation with arithmetic. The designated kill zone, stretching directly before his entrenched position, spanned an approximate depth of 80 yards. Japanese infantry, advancing with a tactical yet swift pace across the rugged and broken terrain, would likely traverse this considerable distance within a window of roughly 90 to 120 seconds. However, the anticipated assault was not a singular unified thrust. Stein's keen eyes observed multiple distinct lines of enemy soldiers meticulously forming up for the attack. Standard Japanese assault doctrine, a well-established and formidable strategy, mandated successive waves of troops, each meticulously spaced about 20 yards apart. This precise interval meant that even if Stein managed to halt the initial wave, a second, equally determined wave would crash upon his position a mere 30 seconds later, followed by the third and then the fourth, creating an unyielding and relentless onslaught. Morrison, Stein's diligent assistant gunner, had conducted a meticulous reconnaissance of the enemy assembly area, counting at least 200 men, with the more probable estimate climbing closer to 250. Given that Japanese infantry squads typically operated in 13-man sections, this formidable force translated into approximately 18 to 20 distinct sections poised for the assault. It was understood that not every one of these sections would funnel directly through Stein's designated kill zone. Some elements would undoubtedly target other segments of the defensive line. Nevertheless, a significant portion, at least half, was expected to converge on their position. This critical assessment meant that between 100 and 125 enemy soldiers had to be decisively stopped right here at this very moment, or the integrity of their defensive line would be irrevocably breached. The M2 heavy machine gun, a formidable instrument of war, possessed an impressive cyclic rate of fire, capable of expelling between 450 to 600 rounds per minute, contingent upon the operator's trigger manipulation. In the crucible of combat, Stein typically maintained an operational cadence of about 500 rounds per minute, a rate he deemed sufficiently effective without pushing the weapon to its maximum, unsustainable limits. To neutralize an estimated 100 men, assuming a theoretical requirement of 4 to 5 rounds per individual to guarantee either a kill or a disabling wound, he would need to unleash approximately 400 to 500 rounds downrange. At his combat rate of 500 rounds per minute, this translated to a mere 50 to 60 seconds of sustained trigger time. However, this calculation was a perilous fantasy, predicated on impossible perfect accuracy and the complete absence of suppressive fire. The unvarnished truth of real combat demanded at least double that expenditure, perhaps 800 to 1,000 rounds in total, to adequately account for inevitable misses, the necessity of suppressive fire, and the stark reality that enemy soldiers rarely succumb to a single hit. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The unsettling arithmetic continued to spiral downward, revealing an increasingly dire situation. The revised estimate of 800 rounds, fired at Stein's operational rate of 500 rounds per minute, necessitated 96 seconds of continuous, sustained fire. Factoring in the additional time required to traverse the heavy gun, sweeping its formidable arc across the entire width of the kill zone to engage multiple targets, pushed the minimum engagement time to an alarming 2 minutes. Yet, the Japanese were not arriving in one concentrated mass. Their assault was designed in successive waves, extending the overall engagement. From the moment of first contact with the vanguard to the final enemy soldier, whether dead or repelled, the assault was projected to last a minimum of 5 minutes. To maintain effective and overwhelming fire throughout this protracted 5-minute window, meticulously accounting for the mandatory barrel changes, Stein would in fact need to sustain firing for approximately 8 to 10 minutes in total. He possessed only 3 barrels. Standard operational procedure for the M2 stipulated a maximum of 6 minutes of firing time, judiciously spread over a 30-minute period to prevent overheating and preserve barrel life. This stark comparison revealed a critical deficiency. He was at least 2 minutes short of the required firing time, potentially a catastrophic 4 minutes short if the unpredictable chaos of battle took its inevitable turn for the worse. And in combat, things invariably did. In a precipitous moment, with barely 5 seconds remaining before the Japanese commenced their movement, Stein made his critical decision. What he was about to undertake constituted a direct and unequivocal violation of every technical manual, every regulation, and every piece of official doctrine the Marine Corps had ever painstakingly codified regarding the M2 Browning machine gun. Yet, his unconventional gambit was firmly rooted in unassailable thermodynamic principles, concepts that any seasoned machinist would intuitively grasp, even if every commissioned officer in the Corps would undoubtedly have court-martialed him for merely suggesting such an unorthodox application. The fundamental principle underpinning Stein's desperate plan was evaporative cooling. This universal phenomenon, a cornerstone of physics, is precisely why one experiences a chilling sensation upon exiting a swimming pool on a windy day. When liquid water undergoes a phase transition and converts into vapor, it absorbs an enormous quantity of thermal energy, specifically approximately 540 calories per gram at sea level. This profound energy absorption, known as the latent heat of vaporization, is the very mechanism through which sweating effectively cools the human body, and it accounts for the distinctive sizzling sound produced when water is poured onto hot pavement. Applying liquid to a superheated metal surface creates an extraordinarily efficacious heat transfer mechanism. The liquid absorbs thermal energy from the intensely hot metal, instantaneously converts into steam, and then carries that absorbed energy away into the surrounding atmosphere. By 1942, industrial machining operations had for decades routinely employed liquid cooling as a well-established practice. Cutting tools, precision drill bits, and powerful milling machines all operated with a constant, unwavering flow of coolant to mitigate thermal degradation and prevent premature failure. The coolant typically comprised a mixture of water and soluble oil, though in dire emergency situations, straight water proved sufficiently effective. Stein possessed this invaluable experiential wisdom from his prior employment at National Cash Register. He had personally witnessed the catastrophic consequences when coolant pumps failed. Tools rapidly overheated, leading to their immediate and irreversible failure within mere seconds. Moreover, he had observed ingenious machinists jury-rigging emergency cooling systems, utilizing whatever liquid was immediately available, including some remarkably creative solutions that would never find inclusion in any official operational manual. The formidable logistical hurdle of cooling an M2 barrel in the midst of active combat was disarmingly simple in its core requirements. One needed a liquid. It needed to be immediately available, and a substantial quantity of it was essential. From a purely thermodynamic standpoint, water was the ideal medium. However, on the sweltering, unforgiving island of Guadalcanal, water was an invaluable and scarce commodity. Canteens were sacrosanct, reserved exclusively for the sustenance of life, not for the extravagant purpose of cooling weapons. Attempting to transport water cans to a forward fighting position solely for gun barrel cooling would necessitate a lengthy and arduous explanation to every officer from the front lines all the way back to division headquarters. Furthermore, in the chaotic maelstrom of a night assault, expediency dictated the use of whatever resources were literally within arm's reach. What Stein and his comrades had within immediate arm's reach was urine, his own, Morrison's, Chen's, and that of any other Marine in their immediate vicinity. Human urine is comprised of approximately 95% water, with the remaining 5% consisting of dissolved urea, creatinine, uric acid, and various salts. From a heat transfer perspective, it demonstrated comparable thermal efficiency to pure water. The dissolved solutes, in fact, marginally elevated the boiling point. While pure water boils at 212 degrees F, urine typically boils at around 214 degrees to 215 degrees F. However, at the extreme barrel temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees, this slight 2-degree disparity became utterly irrelevant. The liquid, irrespective of its minor compositional differences, would instantaneously flash to steam. The unique chemical composition of urine did, admittedly, introduce some inherent complexities. Urea, when subjected to high temperatures, decomposes into ammonia and carbon dioxide, a process that would undoubtedly produce a distinctly unpleasant and pungent effluvium during cooling. The dissolved salts could theoretically precipitate and leave residue deposits within the barrel, Though at the intensely high temperatures involved, most organic compounds would simply combust. The uric acid might also contribute to minor corrosion issues over time. However, these were problems for tomorrow's concern. Today's overriding imperative was the immediate and urgent task of maintaining the barrel sufficiently cool to sustain continuous firing. Marine Corps regulations unequivocally prescribed the very action Stein was contemplating, though the specific wording of this prohibition was somewhat obscurely buried within Technical Manual TM 9-1052-13 under an esoteric appendix titled Unauthorized Cooling Methods. The manual explicitly stated, "Under no circumstances should gunners attempt to cool barrels using non-approved liquids, including seawater, alcohol, petroleum products, or bodily fluids. Such practices may cause permanent damage to barrel surfaces and create unsafe operating conditions." This regulation existed because previous conflicts had taught the military that soldiers, in moments of desperate necessity, would attempt almost anything, and some of those improvised solutions, rather than ameliorating the situation, often exacerbated it. Stein, however, harbored no regard for bureaucratic regulations. His sole concern was the cold, hard math, the unyielding principles of physics, and the existential threat posed by the 200 Japanese soldiers, who were moments away from overwhelming his position. The relentless Japanese advance sought to overrun his position. An initial devastating volley erupted precisely at E-237 hours, unleashing 35 rounds that tore through the leading Japanese section with the brutal efficiency of a saw blade carving through dense bamboo. Corporal Stein operated the heavy machine gun's trigger with instinctive precision, allowing deeply ingrained muscle memory to command the traversing and elevation mechanisms. Meanwhile, his mind was burdened with a separate, critical calculation: the rapidly approaching deadline for the first barrel change, estimated at approximately 90 seconds. Private First Class Morrison had already positioned an empty ammunition can adjacent to the weapon, and both he and Private First Class Chen were keenly aware of the unconventional procedure about to unfold. Stein had conveyed the details in a mere 15 seconds of hushed instructions, a directive that likely flouted several articles of military justice. Yet the Japanese forces continued their unyielding advance. They were compelled to. Once committed to a night assault, there is no possibility of a mid-engagement retreat. Indeed, the second wave of attackers was already in motion, even before the survivors of the first wave had fully impacted the ground. Stein subsequently discharged another 40 rounds into the dense mass of advancing soldiers, systematically sweeping his fire from the left flank to the right across the designated kill zone. The incandescent bursts from the muzzle momentarily obliterated his night vision, yet simultaneously illuminated targets with pristine definition for fleeting half-second intervals. Within these stark flashes he observed a panorama of human countenances, youthful faces etched with grim determination, others contorted by palpable terror. He steadfastly maintained his barrage, each burst a testament to his unwavering resolve in the face of the relentless assault. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. At precisely 92 seconds, the weapon's barrel was escalating to a perilous degree of critical temperature. Stein could perceive the palpable inferno radiating from the weapon itself, even through the protective layers of his standard firing position. The tracers, those luminous indicators of bullet trajectory, had begun to spiral slightly, an unmistakable symptom that the rifling within the barrel was losing its effective grip on the projectiles. Over the deafening hammering of the gun, he vociferated, "Barrel." Private First Class Morrison, primed to act, already had his hands firmly placed on the barrel release mechanism. The conventional protocol for exchanging the barrel necessitated the gunner to disengage the barrel locking pin, rotate it 90 degrees, and then withdraw the barrel rearward. Morrison, having proficiently practiced this critical maneuver perhaps 1,000 times, executed the standard procedure with extraordinary celerity, completing it in a mere 12 seconds. Chen was strategically positioned with the designated ammunition can, not a full one, but the empty container. Stein swiftly seized the superheated barrel from Morrison, holding it horizontally, as Chen decanted the liquid contents directly onto the searing steel. The ensuing effect was instantaneous and spectacularly dramatic. The liquid, upon contacting metal somewhere north of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, converted to steam with such prodigious volume and speed that it produced a sound akin to a pressure cooker, explosively venting. The cloud of vapor that erupted from the barrel was thick, profoundly white, and emanated an acrid scent precisely as one would anticipate. Stein methodically revolved the barrel, ensuring Chen's liquid thoroughly contacted every side, thereby promoting uniform cooling. The astonishingly brief process consumed perhaps 8 seconds in total. Steam was still emanating plumes from the barrel when Morrison slammed the fresh barrel into its mount and secured it firmly in place. The minimal operational interruption for the weapon amounted to a mere 20 seconds. Stein was immediately back on the trigger, resuming his relentless fusillade into the second wave of Japanese soldiers who had exploited those 20 seconds to regain approximately 15 yards of ground closer to their position. He discharged another 80 rounds, observing the Japanese ranks, though decimated, remain unbroken. Their unwavering resolve was evident. They were irrevocably committed to their objective. Their command had undoubtedly assured them that this was the pivotal offensive, the one destined to retake Henderson Field and irrevocably alter the course of the war. They held this conviction with such tenacity that they continued their relentless push. The prevailing odor was an atrocious, revolting miasma, a putrid blend of ammonia from decomposing urine, the acrid bite of cordite smoke, and the metallic tang of vaporized steel coalesced to create an atmosphere so noxious it would induce gagging, were one not entirely consumed by the desperate struggle for survival. Stein's eyes watered profusely, partly from the caustic assault on his sinuses, and partly from the combined effect of smoke and muzzle flash. He remained indifferent to his discomfort. The machine gun was still firing, still putting rounds on target, and that, quite literally, was the paramount concern. Precisely 4 minutes into the engagement, Stein was performing his second barrel rotation. The first cooled barrel, having been resting for 3 minutes, was now ready to re-enter active service. Chen, as an additional safeguard, hit it with another round of liquid cooling, producing yet another prodigious cloud of steam that momentarily shrouded the entire gun position. The Japanese, observing these recurring steam clouds, must have been utterly baffled by the sight, undoubtedly wondering what unconventional armament the Americans had deployed. The intense engagement culminated after an intense 9 minutes and 40 seconds from the initial shot to the final one. Stein discharged a staggering total of 847 rounds, systematically cycling through his 3 barrels 4 complete times, with Private First Class Chen performing the emergency cooling procedure on each barrel twice. Throughout this entire ordeal, the gun never jammed, never misfired, and never failed in its unwavering functionality. When the final enemy combatant either fell or retreated back into the impenetrable jungle darkness, Stein's hands were trembling with such profound exhaustion that he found himself unable to light a cigarette. Morrison, observing his comrade's state, had to perform the simple act for him. The sun's first rays, emerging 6 hours later, unveiled the grim reality of their night's work. Bodies were stacked in dense, overlapping layers across the kill zone, reaching their thickest concentration approximately 40 yards out, precisely where the second and third waves of attackers had collided with the casualties of the first wave. The Division Graves Registration Unit embarked upon the macabre task of meticulously documenting the dead directly in front of Stein's position, a process that consumed 2 full days. The official count confirmed 73 enemy soldiers killed in action, unambiguously credited to the M2 position on Henderson Ridge. An additional 15 to 20 probable kills were noted, indicated by distinct blood trails leading back into the jungle, though no bodies were ultimately recovered. Captured Japanese soldiers from the 38th Division subsequently corroborated that their officers had specifically identified Stein's gun position as the intended breakthrough point, anticipating to overwhelm it through sheer numerical superiority. They had been egregiously mistaken. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Puller, the commanding officer of the 1st Battalion 7th Marines, surveyed the scene at 800 hours. Puller was already a prominent figure, a legend within the Corps. He possessed 2 Navy Crosses, a storied reputation for unflinching courage, and a command style that blended rigorous professionalism with a pragmatic approach that completely disregarded anything that did not contribute to winning battles. He scrutinized the body count, then turned his gaze to Stein's machine gun, and finally observed the empty ammunition can resting beside the position. One of these cans still contained a small pool of liquid at its bottom. Puller instinctively stuck his finger into it, sniffed it, and then uttered a remark that has been recorded in at least 6 different versions across various historical accounts. The printable version states, "Corporal, what in the name of God is this?" Stein elucidated the entire impromptu strategy to him. All of it. The intricate thermal dynamics, the ingenious evaporative cooling principle, and the emergency barrel cooling procedure that had miraculously kept the machine gun firing for nearly 10 minutes straight. Puller listened, his face maintaining a completely neutral, unflappable expression, while Morrison and Chen stood rigidly at attention, their palpable trepidation indicating they fully expected to be arrested on the spot. When Stein concluded his explanation, Puller walked over to the M2, ran his hand along the barrel that was still mounted in the weapon, and made a remarkable observation. The barrel displayed distinct discoloration and some superficial staining. But critically, there was no warping, no structural damage, and no signs of the catastrophic failure that, by all conventional expectations, should have occurred. The weapon had demonstrated an astonishing resilience that defied traditional metallurgical predictions. What transpired next remains subject to varying accounts and interpretations. Some historical narratives suggest that Puller immediately initiated the process for Stein to receive a silver star. Conversely, other reports indicate that Puller submitted a formal incident report, which subsequently triggered a thorough investigation by the division's Ordnance Department. What is, however, definitively recorded within the 1st Marine Division archives is Puller's commendation report, filed on November 15, 1942. This document specifically lauded Corporal Stein's exceptional initiative and remarkable technical ingenuity demonstrated under intense combat conditions. This commendation then advanced through the established military hierarchy, eventually culminating in a recommendation for a Bronze Star, which was ultimately elevated to a Silver Star by the direct intervention of Major General Alexander Vandegrift himself, recognizing the profound impact of Stein's actions. Yet, despite the valor acknowledged, the Marine Corps, as an institution, harbored considerable apprehension regarding the incident. Within a mere week, Corporal Stein received a summons to the division headquarters. Here, he was instructed to replicate his unconventional cooling method for a distinguished panel comprising 2 lieutenant colonels from Ordnance and a major from the Judge Advocate General's office. The JAG officer unequivocally articulated that any unauthorized alterations to standard weapons procedures constituted a direct violation of Article 92 of the Articles of War. This specific article addresses the failure to comply with lawful orders or regulations with potential disciplinary actions, ranging from a reduction in rank to a dishonorable discharge, contingent upon the specific circumstances and the discretion of the commanding officers. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. In stark contrast, the ordnance officers present were primarily focused on acquiring intricate details. They arrived equipped with a demonstration M2 machine gun, a chronograph for precise muzzle velocity measurements, and an ample supply of ammunition to conduct practical, real-world tests. They compelled Stein to perform his unique cooling procedure a total of 6 times, meticulously monitoring barrel temperature, timing, and overall effectiveness during each iteration. The comprehensive results emanating from this November 1942 demonstration were subsequently classified as restricted and formally documented within Ordnance Report 421 EM73, a document that remained undisclosed to the public until its declassification in 1967. The revelations from these crucial tests directly challenged and fundamentally contradicted 2 decades of established military doctrine concerning the cooling of machine gun barrels. The ordnance officers meticulously measured the barrel's temperature both before and after Stein's innovative liquid cooling technique using highly sensitive thermocouple probes. It was observed that a barrel operating at a scorching 680 F experienced a dramatic temperature reduction to 150 F in approximately 15 seconds when subjected to Stein's method. In comparison, allowing that identical barrel to cool naturally through air from 680 F to 150 F demanded a protracted period of 7 minutes and 20 seconds. This demonstrated that the liquid cooling method was astonishingly approximately 29 times more efficient and rapid. The subsequent chemical analysis presented a mixed bag of findings. Indeed, the decomposition of urine produced ammonia vapor, which was undeniably unpleasant and posed potential hazards. particularly in confined operational spaces. Furthermore, the dissolved salts present in the liquid left microscopic residues within the barrel, which theoretically could compromise accuracy after numerous applications. However, critically, the barrels exhibited no signs of warping, cracking, or structural failure. While the precipitous temperature drop did induce thermal shock, a sudden and intense contraction of the steel, the SAE 4150 chromium molybdenum steel utilized in the barrels proved remarkably resilient, capable of withstanding these extreme fluctuations. After 6 consecutive cooling cycles, the test barrel displayed a negligible 0.03 inches of measurable wear, beyond what would be considered normal firing wear, a figure well within acceptable operational tolerances. The Marine Corps found itself grappling with a significant institutional quandary. They simply could not officially sanction or endorse the act of urinating on machine guns. The public perception or optics of such a practice would be disastrous, and the genuine health concerns associated with it were undeniable. Moreover, one could scarcely imagine attempting to justify such a procedure to Congress during critical appropriations hearings. However, they were equally unable to simply disregard the incontrovertible results. Stein had achieved what every technical manual and established protocol declared impossible: sustained fire exceeding the weapon's theoretical limitations without experiencing a catastrophic failure. The resolution to this peculiar dilemma was characteristically bureaucratic. They opted not to officially approve the method, but crucially, they also chose not to court-martial anyone involved. The incident was discreetly acknowledged in training materials, serving as an illustrative example of unauthorized field modifications. It was noted that while such modifications might prove effective under specific, dire circumstances, they nevertheless remained strictly prohibited under standard operating procedures. A significant shift, however, occurred in the established doctrine surrounding spare barrels and barrel-changing protocols. Prior to the Guadalcanal campaign, most M2 machine gun positions were typically equipped with only one spare barrel. Following the experiences of Guadalcanal, this standard was dramatically increased to a minimum of 2 spare barrels, with 3 being allocated whenever logistical support permitted. The emphasis on the speed and efficiency of barrel-changing procedures intensified dramatically. Training cycles that had previously dedicated approximately 2 hours to barrel-changing drills were expanded to a comprehensive 8 hours. Marines were rigorously trained to perform barrel changes blindfolded and while wearing gas masks under simulated combat conditions, practicing until they could consistently execute the procedure in under 20 seconds. The post-war evolution of quick-change barrel systems owed a direct and undeniable debt to incidents like Corporal Stein's. The M2HB model, which was formally introduced into service in 1945, incorporated an advanced barrel release mechanism that significantly reduced the change time from a previous 30-45 seconds to a more efficient 15 to 20 seconds. The M60 machine gun, first deployed in 1957, was conceptually designed from its inception with rapid barrel changes as a paramount operational requirement. With a well-trained crew, the average barrel change time for the M60 was an impressive 8 seconds. Subsequent systems, such as the M240 and M249, further built upon this foundational doctrine, treating the barrel as a readily consumable component that crews were expected to swap multiple times during a single engagement. Military research into various methods of barrel cooling persisted throughout the duration of the Cold War. Aberdeen Proving Ground conducted a series of classified tests in 1954, meticulously investigating a range of emergency cooling techniques. These included the use of water, oil, compressed air, and, indeed, urine. The outcomes of these tests conclusively corroborated Stein's empirical findings. Liquid cooling was effective. It worked rapidly, and crucially, it did not cause structural damage to the barrel. The tests also explored the practical application of pre-positioned water containers at defensive positions specifically for barrel cooling, a practice that subsequently became a standard component of Vietnam-era military doctrine. Tony Stein, the individual at the center of this extraordinary narrative, survived the harrowing campaign on Guadalcanal and continued to fight throughout the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. He earned a battlefield commission, being promoted to second lieutenant at Bougainville in 1943. He endured the brutal fighting on Peleliu in 1944 and landed with the 5th Marine Division during the invasion of Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. On the treacherous black sands of that island, Stein fearlessly led 8 distinct charges against entrenched Japanese pillboxes, personally neutralizing 4 enemy positions and courageously evacuating wounded Marines under intense enemy fire. Tragically, he was killed by sniper fire on the 3rd day of the battle. President Harry Truman posthumously bestowed upon him the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The accompanying citation lauded his extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry, yet it conspicuously omitted any mention of Henderson Ridge or the night he managed to keep a machine gun firing for 10 continuous minutes, relying solely on fundamental physics, sheer desperation, and whatever liquids were immediately at hand. Beginning with the vital role of readily available liquids in the most dire circumstances, the narrative shifts focus to a specific piece of military hardware. The M2 Browning heavy machine gun, bearing the unique serial number 32475. This formidable weapon was precisely the one wielded by a courageous individual during a pivotal engagement in 1942, a year synonymous with intense global conflict and desperate measures. Remarkably, this particular M2 not only endured the harrowing crucible of the Second World War, but subsequently saw extensive service through the Korean War, a testament to its robust engineering and the unwavering dedication of the Marines who operated it. Its distinguished career eventually concluded in 1968, when it was finally decommissioned from active duty, having discharged an astonishing estimated total of 400,000 rounds during its long and impactful tenure. Today, this storied firearm holds a place of honor, enshrined within the revered National Museum of the Marine Corps, located in Quantico, Virginia. Yet for all its historical significance and the detailed information presented on its accompanying display placard, there remains a notable omission. No mention is made of the ingenious, albeit unconventional, cooling technique that was employed to keep it operational during that desperate night. This absence subtly underscores a deeper narrative, one often left unspoken in official histories. Indeed, there exists a unique collection of anecdotes and experiences that the Marine Corps consciously chooses to safeguard, circulating them exclusively among its own members. These are the tales understood implicitly by Marines who comprehend that achieving victory on the battlefield sometimes demands a strategic deviation from established rules and conventional wisdom, especially when confronted with the unprecedented ferocity and unique challenges of a particular combat scenario. A true hell, unlike any described in standard operating procedures. The valiant defenders who valiantly held Henderson Ridge during that fateful November night were intimately acquainted with this profound, unvarnished truth. They understood that genuine innovation, often born from the crucible of necessity, might present itself in unconventional, even unappealing forms, potentially transgressing official regulations and standard protocols. Nevertheless, such audacious ingenuity, despite its nonconformity, frequently proves indispensable in the preservation of human lives. This critical, albeit unorthodox, lesson, while conspicuously absent from any official military manual or doctrine, unequivocally merits inclusion and recognition within the broader lexicon of combat wisdom. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from and what your thoughts are on the topic discussed in this video.